would Europa League be a failure?
No, not for me. I think there's been a very interesting discourse on this around on Spurs social media today about this. I made a video on it myself talking about it, and I think that there's a difference between wanting the Champions League and being happy with Europa as the kind of the fallback option almost, if you like. But fans wanting the Europa League, I don't see that. I don't see that you should aim for the Europa League because you're not aiming as high as you can. But there's nothing wrong with, if we don't get in the Champions League, being happy with European football in some way, whether that is the Europa League or not. The European Conference League will be another story because that implies a further fall off from where we were. And people would like to throw at Tottenham that we were top for part of the season. And then it's like, now you're settling for Europa League football. And Europa League football would be an incredible sign of progression from where we were last season, not even qualifying for Europe at all. Potentially qualifying for the Conference League on the final day of the season. We've come a hell of a long way in the last sort of 12 months. And to finish fifth, no Spurs fan should turn their noses up at that. There's pros and cons to being in the Europa League. I think one of the issues that sort of people have had in terms of just European football in general is that, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier around the perceived naivety around Ange's tactics or the lack of sort of training on set pieces, is that, these mini failures in these games are coming when we haven't got a busy fixture schedule, when we're only playing one game a week. And then you think about what's going to happen on the training field when you've got Champions League on the Wednesday and Premier League on the Saturday, or Europa League on the Thursday and Premier League at the weekend. But again, these are things that can all be ironed out over time. And one thing I think as well is, as much as I think the Europa League is a great thing for Spurs, people are judging. I've seen a lot of people saying today that we would get eaten alive in the Champions League next season. Again, sort of referring back to Ange and his tactics and all those kind of things, and saying this group of players isn't good enough right now to be in the Champions League. You're never ready. You're never ready for the Champions League. No, unless you're Man City, unless you finish first or second or maybe third, like, no one's ready for it. No, it can be so unpredictable. Look at Man City. The first few years they got into the Champions League after winning the Premier League, they didn't get out of the group. And now they've gone on to win it sort of 10 years down the line and could potentially be heading to another final this year. So the Champions League is you never know. You never know what's going to happen. But you're judging Spurs' inability to be ready for the Champions League off the back of what you've seen over the last few weeks, and what you're judging Tottenham on what they are now. And we're in April here. If Spurs were in the Champions League, the first game will be in September off the back of hopefully an ambitious transfer window. And again, people look at ambition in all different ways. But if we have a transfer window like we did last year, we should be excited. Yes, I think, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, about improving on the physical profiles of certain players across the pitch, which then again elevates you in terms of being in the Champions League as well. Having players that are physically capable of, like whether it's a striker, for example, whether it's someone like an Ivan Toney or a Dominic Solanke, someone who you can trust with the ball with his back to goal, or whether it's more of that dominator, that destroyer, number 6 profile, whether that's Amadou Onana or someone else. So you can't judge Tottenham's performance in the Champions League that will begin or could potentially begin in 5 or 6 months' time on the Tottenham that you're seeing getting battered by Newcastle. You can't do that. That's not fair. It's not fair on the manager, and it's not fair on the group of players. You just have to trust them, and we should be excited about it. One of the things under Ange Postecoglou is that we, for periods in games or periods of the season, we develop this fearlessness. We've gone and clawed games back at the Etihad. We've beaten Liverpool at home. We've gone and drawn at Arsenal, put in a really good performance. We've got Arsenal in a couple of weeks' time. Yes, we folded against Newcastle, but we went and beat Aston Villa 4-0 a few weeks ago. And yes, there's been a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde nature to the season over the last sort of 4 or 5 months. But again, that consistency comes with time, and that's why we shouldn't be scared about embracing the challenges of the Champions League if we were to get there. But that by no means makes Europa League football a failure. That categorically cannot be a failure. And I think in terms of the pros for that, we've got a very exciting young group of players coming through the academy at the moment with the likes of Jamie Donnelly, Will Lancashire, Dane Scarlett, Iago Santiago, Alfie Dorrington, Ashley Phillips, although he's not an academy product, is a young player at Spurs outlined at Plymouth who will want to get more game time next season. That allows them to bed in a little bit more. It's sort of a less harsh environment. But again, Spurs' Europa League record over the last few years, or the last few times we've been in it, isn't that great. And then that kind of creates another debate around the fact that it's all well and good saying that around giving the kids a chance in the Europa League. but managers in the past have been lambasted for not taking the competition seriously enough. So there's that sort of gamble that you've got to, or there's the balance that you've kind of got to find around being competitive, but also giving players opportunities that are very much deserving of it. But yeah, and also it's a chance for Tottenham to win a trophy.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
But so is the Champions League, and that's not, I don't think we're going to win the Champions League. I don't think we'd win the Europa League if we got into it next year, because we wouldn't be the favourites. We'd be up there for sure, but you can't just go into it assuming you're going to win that. We're Tottenham. We haven't won a trophy since 2008, but it represents a good chance. And I think the attitude has got to change a little bit, in the sense that, yes, we should be aiming for the Champions League. That's what we all want. We all want to play in the European elite competition next year. But we shouldn't turn our noses up at a fifth place finish after the context of the last year and what Ange has kind of done. And you can forget about, being in the top four, being top of the league at the start of the season and falling away from that. It's, people are all up for a rebuild until it gets a little bit tough, and things haven't got tough yet. They've not got tough under Postecoglou. These bumps in the road were kind of expected. So for people then to start throwing things out about, failures and stuff like that I find very interesting. But yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but my overall consensus is aim as high as you can and then see where you finish and then go from there. I think that's very much my attitude to all of this. If we're in the Champions League, I'm ecstatic. If I'm in the Europa League, I'm really excited about what we can do in that competition.
Yeah, exactly. I think I feel like this season's a bit of a write-off anyways. Like you said, with the context of last summer, no one thought we'd be here. No one thought we'd be in the conversation for top four, let alone Europa League. And the Europa League isn't even... I think there's a common misconception about the Europa League, because you're thinking about when we were last in it, it wasn't that strong of a competition. It's so strong now. There are some European giants.
Look at the quarterfinals.
Colossal clubs. Yeah, it's amazing. And over the last couple of years, I've been hooked on the Europa League. Like, I'll never catch myself watch Europa League if Spurs weren't in it, unless I heard that Arsenal were losing in Europa League, and I was like, oh, go on, I'll turn that on. But it's an amazing competition, and it shouldn't be scoffed at. It should not be scoffed at. And I know to counteract what you were saying, I think a lot of a large segment of the fan base would sort of think, if we're not happy with Champions League, that's a lack of ambition from a fan base. Well, no, I don't think so, because like you said, it's a chance to win a trophy. We shouldn't scoff at any competition that is another chance to win a trophy for Spurs, because we're starving for that trophy. And Postecoglou said himself, every competition he's in, he wants to win. He wants to win it. And I agree with you. I don't think we win the Champions League if we're in it next season. No one expects us in season 2 of. Can we? But no one expects us in season 2 to win the fucking Champions League. Do you know what I mean? That's ridiculous. Yeah. That is delusional. I do think. And then some people say, "Hang on, there's a lack of ambition there." Come on now, get a reality check. This is a 4-year plan. Imagine we rock up Champions League next year and win it. I mean, it's not going to happen. But obviously, you can't sort of write us off. And if we do go in the Champions League, you expect us to go all out in it. But Europa League is a much more realistic target and a healthier sort of trajectory process, isn't it? If we get to Europa League, absolutely. And then we work our squad, that's another chance to develop our squad, like you were saying. We've had a massive problem in the last 3-4 years with developing our youth players. A lot of youth players have a lot of promise and they don't make it because we don't have chances to sort of integrate them in the team. And the Europa League's perfect. Imagine Lucas Bergvall in the Europa League. People would be raving about him because he that's the sort of scene that you can see him in and thriving in Europe, but not just yet. He's still so young, but it gives those types of players the opportunity to thrive in it. It's still a very sort of attractive competition for players, new signings. And like Ange said, he doesn't want to sign a player if you just want Champions League, because that's not ambitious, because that's putting a ceiling on what we're going to do as a club. If you think, hang on, I'm going to sign for them because they're in Champions League, we want to be winning trophies eventually. So it come to us to win the league, not just to play in the Champions League. That's a lack of ambition in itself. And another positive is that players are going to have a chance to get a bit of a break because we can rotate the squad. Because you've seen, even in one, well, apart from the FA Cup and the League Cup, we didn't really have longevity in those competitions. But in this one season, you can see players are tiring. And that's from one game a week. Like, Son needs a break, I think. Son looks shattered. I know he's had the Asian Cup in between, which is very heavy on him. But he does look tired, and that sort of correlates to the same amount of time he'd probably be playing Champions League football, if not a less amount of game time, him going off in the Asian Cup mid-season. So it will give, if we do get like an Ivan Toney in, you can just rotate and you can have fresh legs and it's, yeah, I just think it's not all doom and gloom. It's actually a positive sign if we get Europa League. If we get Champions League, amazing. Absolutely amazing, because we never thought we'd be in this situation. But I just think Europa League will come for that trophy if we're in it next year. Like, I really think we'd go far in it, and I think we'd take it seriously as a club, and we'd see it as a fantastic opportunity to develop this process and move along up the trajectory, because this club's going places. Like, I know performances like Newcastle make us forget that we are going places, and this process has turned around so significantly in the last 6 months. We thought it would take so much longer to be where we are right now. People were saying they'd happily be sixth place if we play good football. We've surpassed that. I think there is a feeling. There was a feeling that after the first 10 games, because we were so good, we set the standard so high that people were thinking, we got to finish Champions League. You got to change your hopes and around how you are actually performing. But I mean, things happened. Like, we got so many injuries mid-season. We had to deal with that. The players have come back and they haven't been at the same form levels, which is expected because they've had injuries. And there have been dips in form for players and for the team, and there have been performances, like you said, that we all expected tough times. We all expected moments like this. And yeah, I know expectations do change, but again, this season is kind of a write-off, and Europa League would be fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree.